On February 26, 2015, a character from a canceled superhero cartoon walked onto the screen of the show that had taken its place, looked the lead character in the eye and told him, in 14 words spoken plainly, that he was a mockery of everything the world holds sacred about heroes. The character speaking was Aqualad. The show he came from had been replaced. The show he was speaking on had benefited directly from that replacement. The line was supposed to be a joke. Across 6 years, this animated series attempted 9 more crossovers, and almost everyone ended the same way. The show was Teen Titans Go, and the episode was called Let's Get Serious. It was the 32nd episode of the second season, the 84th episode of the series, overall, and the first time the show had used a crossover to address its critics directly. There are 10 of these crossover attempts worth talking about, and they will be told here in chronological order, oldest first. Some of them aired as television episodes. Some of them aired as theatrical features. One of them aired as a 4-day musical event and produced a Billboard charting song. One of them produced an 83-minute movie that was largely a rebroadcast of a film made 25 years earlier. They span from February 2015 to June 2021. 6 years and 4 months across which a single animated comedy attempted, over and over again, to share the screen with other properties and almost always created a public mess in the process. Before going further, a quick note: if long-form sleep essays like this one are the kind of thing you find useful, hitting subscribe genuinely helps the channel keep going. It costs nothing and takes about 3 seconds. Now, back to it. The earliest of the 10 happened on that February night in 2015, with Let's Get Serious. To understand why the episode worked the way it did, the surrounding context has to be laid out clearly, because the context is the reason the episode caused the reaction it did. Teen Titans Go had debuted on Cartoon Network on April 23, 2013. The show that had aired in that same Cartoon Network animation slot before Teen Titans Go was called Young Justice, an action drama series about a covert team of young superheroes that had launched in November 2010. Young Justice had developed an unusually devoted adult and teen fanbase. It was action-heavy, it featured serialized plotting across multi-episode arcs. It treated its young superhero protagonists as morally complex characters who made consequential decisions in a world with stakes. Cartoon Network had canceled Young Justice after its second season in March 2013, and the slot it had occupied went, almost immediately, to Teen Titans Go, a comedy reboot of the 2003 Teen Titans animated series that ran at the opposite end of the tonal spectrum. Where Young Justice had been serious, Teen Titans Go was deliberately, aggressively, comically silly. Where Young Justice had spent time on character interiority, Teen Titans Go ran on rapid joke turnover. Where Young Justice had been built for an audience that wanted to think about superhero stories, Teen Titans Go was built for an audience that wanted to laugh at them. Many of the fans of Young Justice did not take this transition well. Online discourse from 2013 and 2014 is full of long, articulate, frustrated posts from former Young Justice viewers explaining at length why they felt the cancellation of their show in favor of Teen Titans Go was a betrayal of what Cartoon Network had been building. Some of these fans went further and began a public campaign, asking Cartoon Network to revive Young Justice or to give it a 3rd season. Others simply directed their frustration at Teen Titans Go itself, treating the new show as a kind of symbolic enemy that had taken something they loved. The Teen Titans Go writing staff was aware of this. They had been receiving the criticism for almost 2 years by the time Let's Get Serious was written. The episode was their direct response. The premise of Let's Get Serious is simple. The Teen Titans are at their tower being silly when a group of villains called the HIVE, 5 attempts to steal radioactive material from a storage facility. The Titans go to stop them, but are interrupted by the unexpected arrival of 3 characters from Young Justice itself: Aqualad, Miss Martian, and Superboy. These 3 characters, voiced by the same actors who had voiced them in the original Young Justice series, including Kari Payton, who voiced both Aqualad and Cyborg, defeat the HIVE 5 with quick, competent action, while the Teen Titans make jokes and fail to contribute. If you were watching this scene on the night it aired, in February of 2015, you would have recognized within about 30 seconds what the writers were doing. After the battle, Aqualad turns to Robin and delivers what would become the most quoted line in the episode. He tells Robin that the Teen Titans are a mockery of everything the world holds sacred about heroes. The Teen Titans, embarrassed, decide that they need to become serious in response. The rest of the episode shows them trying to be serious, becoming visibly serious in a parody of darker superhero animation, and eventually realizing that being serious is making them miserable. They return to their silly selves at the end of the episode, and the lesson, such as it is that the way the show has always worked is the right way. The crossover did several things at once. First, on the literal level, it brought characters from Young Justice into a Teen Titans Go episode. That alone was provocative, because the entire reason Young Justice characters were available for a cameo was that the show had been cancelled. Second, on the meta level, it took the most articulate criticism that Young Justice fans had been making for 2 years and put it in the mouth of the most beloved Young Justice character, and then framed that criticism as funny. The joke being made was that the people who took superhero shows seriously enough to want them to be serious were themselves a kind of joke. The joke landed for some viewers. For others, it landed as something that was not a joke at all, but a public taunt aimed at a fan base that had already lost the show they loved. The episode wrote itself into the canonical record as the first of what the Teen Titans Go production staff would eventually start calling, internally and informally, the hater episodes. There would be more of them. Let's Get Serious was the prototype. The reception data confirms how unevenly the joke landed. If you go looking for this episode on IMDb today, you will find it carries a rating of 5.9 out of 10, which is meaningfully lower than the show's average and meaningfully lower than the episodes that ran immediately before and after it. The user reviews that drove that rating down are not from viewers who failed to understand the joke. They are from viewers who understood the joke perfectly and felt that the joke itself was the problem. Several reviews from the time make the argument explicitly. The writers had used their platform to mock the fans of a canceled show, and the cancellation itself was the reason that platform existed. The optics of that were impossible to miss, and they shaped the way the episode was received, both at the time and in the years that followed. There is one further piece of context worth noting about Let's Get Serious, because it matters for the pattern that the rest of the 10 will follow. The episode was directed by Peter Ryda Mikhail and produced by Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelinek. Those 3 names will recur throughout this video, because those 3 people would direct, write, and produce most of the crossover episodes that followed. The decision-making behind every crossover Teen Titans Go, attempted between 2015 and 2021, traces back to that core production group. The first crossover the show made established a pattern, and the pattern is something close to this. Bring in the property the audience associates with seriousness, with care, with reverence, or with nostalgia, and then use the crossover to acknowledge, parody, or undermine the audience's relationship to that property. The first time this happened, it was Young Justice. By the 10th time it happened, the property being undermined was Space Jam, a film that itself had cult status. And the format was an 83-minute episode that consisted largely of the original Space Jam being replayed with Teen Titans Go, characters commenting over it. The arc from the 1st to the 10th is consistent. Let's Get Serious set the template. The episode aired on a Thursday night. The reactions began the same night and grew across the weekend that followed. By the following Monday, fan sites and DC Comics blogs were covering the episode almost uniformly with frustration. The Teen Titans Go! Production staff said nothing publicly in response. The show continued airing new episodes the following week. The pattern that began with Let's Get Serious would, over the next 12 months, expand to include not just shows that had been canceled, but shows that were still airing, shows that belonged to competing networks, and eventually shows that the production team itself had previously worked on. The mockery of Young Justice was the first one. It was not the most pointed one. It was, however, the one that confirmed, both internally and externally, that this was a tool the writing staff intended to keep using. There is one detail about Let's Get Serious that is worth noting, because it has been the source of much of the long-term reception of the episode. The Young Justice characters who appear in the crossover, especially Aqualad, are not portrayed in a mocking way. They are portrayed competently as serious heroes who win the fight. The Teen Titans, by contrast, are portrayed as the buffoons they are in the rest of the show. The visual framing of the episode is consistent with what the original Young Justice fanbase would have wanted to see, in the sense that Aqualad gets to be cool, gets to be heroic, and gets to deliver a withering line directly at the protagonist of a show that the fanbase had been frustrated with for 2 years. The framing is then complicated by the episode's resolution. The Teen Titans, having tried to be serious, conclude that being serious is bad for them. The lesson the episode delivers at the level of plot is that the silly approach is the right approach. The lesson the episode delivers at the level of subtext, however, is that the Teen Titans Go. Production team had been listening to the Young Justice fans for 2 years and had decided to publicly disagree with them. The episode functions simultaneously as a competent portrayal of the Young Justice characters the fan base loved, and as a rejection of the values that fan base associated with those characters. Both readings are correct. Both readings have driven the long-running discussion of the episode's place in the show's history. The Young Justice property itself has had an unusual afterlife. The show was revived for a third season in 2019, 4 years after Let's Get Serious aired, on the DC Universe streaming service. A fourth season followed in 2021. The Young Justice revival was a direct result of the sustained fan campaign that had begun in 2013 and had never stopped, the same campaign that Let's Get Serious had been responding to. The revival was, in this sense, a vindication of the audience that the Teen Titans Go episode had been mocking. The audience had been correct that there was sustained appetite for Young Justice. The audience had been correct that the show had been worth bringing back. The audience had been correct, in retrospect, that the mockery of their position in Let's Get Serious had been the mockery of a position that turned out to be commercially viable. The Teen Titans Go. Production team has never publicly addressed this. The show has not made a follow-up episode about Young Justice's revival. The crossover the team did make in February 2015 stands as it was, with the framing it had at the time in a media environment that has since shifted to the position the framing was rejecting. The second of the 10 happened 28 days later, on March 26, 2015, and it was technically not allowed to be a crossover at all. The episode was called Truth, Justice, and What, the 36th episode of the second season and the 88th episode of the series overall. It was written by Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelinek, the same pair who had written Let's Get Serious, and directed by Peter Ryder McHale. The episode brought the Teen Titans into conflict with a group of 4 pizza-loving anthropomorphic Ninja Turtles who lived in the sewers. The 4 turtles were named in the episode the Cool Turtle Dudes. They were obviously, transparently, almost defiantly the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They were not, however, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because Cartoon Network was not allowed to use them. The right situation that made this episode necessary in the form it took was this. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise was, at the time the episode aired, owned by Nickelodeon, which had purchased the rights in October 2009 for $145 million. Nickelodeon was Cartoon Network's primary competitor. Since the purchase, Nickelodeon had begun producing its own Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series, the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which had become one of the most successful programs on that network. Cartoon Network and the Teen Titans Go. Production team would have had no realistic path to securing an official crossover with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because the franchise was a flagship asset of the network they were competing against. Cartoon Network would not license its characters to Nickelodeon for a crossover. Nickelodeon would not license its characters to Cartoon Network for one either. The Teen Titans Go staff wanted to do the crossover anyway, so they did it without permission, by simply renaming the characters and not referring to them by their individual names. The Cool Turtle Dudes that appeared in Truth, Justice, and What are 4 turtles in colored masks who live in sewers, eat pizza, and have the same general body types and personalities as the 4 iconic Ninja Turtles. The orange-masked one is goofy and loves pizza. The blue-masked one is the team leader. The red-masked one is aggressive. The purple-masked one is the inventor. They use weapons. One of them wields nunchaku. Another wields a staff. The visual design is recognizable enough that no viewer who has ever seen the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in any of their numerous adaptations across the previous 30 years would fail to identify what they were looking at. If you grew up with the original 1987 animated series, or with the 2003 series, or with any of the films, you knew immediately what you were looking at. The episode does not name any of the 4 turtles individually. It refers to them collectively as the Cool Turtle Dudes and otherwise lets the visual recognition do the work. This is called, in television production, writing around trademark. It is a legal practice with a long history. It allows productions to reference properties they do not have permission to use, provided they avoid the specific names and visual elements that are trademarked. The episode's plot is a competition over pizza. The Teen Titans love pizza. The Cool Turtle Dudes also love pizza. There is a town pizza ban. Both groups want pizza. The 2 groups fight over the right to maintain access to pizza. The Teen Titans win the fight. They then take the shells off the Cool Turtle Dudes' bodies and wear the shells themselves, leaving the 4 turtles undressed and unconscious on the floor of the sewer. The episode ends without showing what happens to them after this. The wiki entries documenting the episode note this as one of the unresolved questions of the show, in the same dry tone that other wiki entries note unresolved plot points in serialized drama. The Cool Turtle dudes are removed from the world of the episode without ceremony. The Teen Titans get the pizza. There is one casting detail that is worth noting because it makes the unauthorized nature of the crossover even more visible. The orange-masked Cool Turtle dude, the goofy pizza-loving one, was voiced in the episode by Greg Cipes. Greg Cipes is the voice of Beast Boy on Teen Titans Go. Greg Cipes was also the voice of Michelangelo on Nickelodeon's 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where he had been voicing Michelangelo for 3 years at the time Truth, Justice, and What aired. He was simultaneously, in 2015, the voice of Michelangelo at Nickelodeon and the voice of Beast Boy at Cartoon Network. The Teen Titans Go. Production team gave him a third role, voicing the unofficial Michelangelo XP on a Cartoon Network show in an episode that the show he was already on at Nickelodeon could not have produced. The casting was the joke. The audience that recognized Greg Cipes' voice would recognize what was happening. The audience that did not recognize his voice would simply see 4 turtles fighting some superheroes. If you knew what you were looking at, you understood the casting choice as a deliberate inside joke. If you did not, you saw a forgettable comedy beat. The reception to the episode was muted at the time of broadcast and grew sharper over the years that followed. The episode currently sits in the middle of the show's IMDb ratings for the second season, neither acclaimed nor reviled, which is striking given the boldness of the corporate maneuver underlying it. The Teen Titans Go. FanWiki notes the casting decision matter-of-factly. The TV Tropes page for the episode notes the writing around trademark situation with similar dryness. The reaction from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fans was a smaller version of the reaction Young Justice fans had had a month earlier. The episode took a property they cared about, used it without permission, and treated the use as a joke. The difference was that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles property was, at the time, in robust commercial health. The 2012 series was airing successfully on Nickelodeon. A live-action film had been released the previous summer. The fans of the property did not need the Teen Titans Go version to access the characters. They had access to the real ones. The crossover therefore landed less as a betrayal and more as a strange, slightly hostile, slightly desperate gesture at a property that the people making the gesture clearly knew they were not entitled to. What Truth, Justice, and What demonstrated, structurally, was that the Teen Titans Go. Production team was willing to do crossovers without permission when permission was not available. This was a relatively unusual stance for an animated children's series to take. Most production teams in that space would simply not have done the episode at all. The trademark concerns alone would have stopped most productions from going forward. The Teen Titans Go team went forward. They were confident that the writing around trademark approach was legally defensible. They were confident that Nickelodeon would not sue. They were confident that the audience would understand the wink. All 3 of those assumptions turned out to be correct. Nickelodeon did not sue. No legal action was ever taken regarding the episode. The audience that recognized the reference understood the wink immediately. The episode aired, ran in reruns, was added to streaming services, and remains in the show's catalog to this day. The willingness to do this kind of episode, however, set a tone for what would follow. The tone was that the Teen Titans Go production team did not consider standard industry norms about cross-property collaboration to be binding on them. If they wanted to do a crossover, they would do the crossover. If they could get the permissions, they would get them. If they could not, they would do the crossover without the permissions, change the names enough to avoid lawsuits, and let the audience fill in the rest. This was a posture that worked for them in the case of Truth, Justice, and What, which produced no lasting industry consequences. It is also the posture that produced, in the years that followed, a steady stream of crossover episodes that other productions would not have attempted. Some of those crossovers were officially licensed. Some of them were officially announced. Some of them were promoted by Cartoon Network as major events. Almost all of them, regardless of the licensing situation, produced a reaction from the audience that was more divided, more frustrated, and more vocal than the reactions to standard non-crossover episodes of the show. The Truth, Justice, and What episode was the second installment in what would eventually become a clearly visible pattern. By the time the pattern was clearly visible, it would also be too late to do anything about it. The other thing that Truth, Justice, and What established was a baseline practice for how the Teen Titans Go production team would handle properties from other companies and other networks. The practice was to acknowledge the property visually, but not by name, to use a voice actor with a documented connection to the property as a wink, to give the crossover a brief and self-contained plot that did not affect the show's continuing storylines, and to publish the episode as a standard half-hour broadcast without special promotional support. This practice was repeatable. The Teen Titans Go team would use variations of it across the next 6 years, applying it to properties as varied as the Ninja Turtles, Beetlejuice, Freakazoid, and the Looney Tunes. The practice worked, in production terms, because it required only the show's existing animation budget, the show's existing voice cast, plus a small number of guest stars, and the show's standard writing turnaround. It did not work, in reception terms, because the practice always carried with it the same implicit message. The message was that the property being crossed over with was something the show was free to use for its own purposes, with or without permission, with or without the input of the people most invested in the property. The audiences that cared about the properties being used in this way noticed the message. They noticed it consistently. The reactions to Truth, Justice, and What were the first version of those reactions, in a smaller register than the reactions to the later episodes would be. But the structure of the reaction was the same. Something the audience cared about had been taken into the Teen Titans Go universe without ceremony, and the audience had to decide how to feel about that. There is one further detail worth mentioning about the period between Let's Get Serious in February 2015 and Truth, Justice, and What in March 2015. The two episodes aired within 28 days of each other. They were back-to-back attempts at the crossover format. The fact that the production team attempted two crossovers in such close succession suggests that the team had, internally, decided crossovers were going to be a recurring tool. The decision was made early. The decision was made before the production team could have had meaningful data about how the audience would receive the first crossover. The two crossovers were apparently in production simultaneously. The team committed to the format before they knew whether the format would work. The format, in commercial terms, did work. The episodes aired, they drew viewers, they produced no immediate financial consequences for the show. The format, in reception terms, did not work as smoothly, but the production team appears to have decided that the reception was acceptable as long as the financial outcomes were acceptable. This calculus would govern every subsequent crossover decision the team made. The next crossover the show would attempt, 15 months after Truth, Justice, and What, would be the first one that was officially announced as a crossover, the first one that involved a property Cartoon Network actually owned, and the first one that received significant promotional support from the network. It was also the first one that fans of both shows involved would, almost immediately upon airing, agree they did not want. The third of the 10 happened on June 30th, 2016, and it was the first time Teen Titans Go attempted a crossover with another currently airing Cartoon Network show. The episode was called TTG VPP, written by Emily Brundage and directed by Peter Ryder McHale. It was the 40th episode of the third season and the 144th episode of the series overall. The other show involved was The Powerpuff Girls, specifically the 2016 reboot of The Powerpuff Girls, which had launched on Cartoon Network on April 4th, 2016, less than 3 months before the crossover aired. The Powerpuff Girls 2016 was, at the time of the crossover, the freshest of all possible reboot wounds on Cartoon Network. It had taken a beloved late 1990s animated series, replaced almost the entire original cast, including the original voice actress for the character Bubbles, and produced a new version that the existing Powerpuff Girls fanbase had received with significant hostility. Within its first month on air, the Powerpuff Girls 2016 had become a reference point in online discussion about how reboots could go wrong. The Teen Titans Go production team, themselves already a reference point in those same discussions, decided to bring the two shows together. The episode's premise pits the two superhero teams against the villain Mojo Jojo, who has fled from Townsville to Jump City after being defeated by the Powerpuff Girls in the opening scene. In Jump City, Mojo Jojo recruits Beast Boy and Cyborg into a plan to build a monkey army. The Powerpuff Girls pursue him to Jump City, where they encounter Robin, Starfire, and Raven, who treat them condescendingly because of their younger age. The Powerpuff Girls and the three older Teen Titans compete to see which superhero team can stop Mojo Jojo first. Mojo Jojo's army of monkeys is built. The combined team eventually defeats him. The episode closes with the narrator from the original Powerpuff Girls present throughout the episode as a voice only Robin can hear, delivering a closing line about how the day was saved no thanks to the Teen Titans. A close reading of the episode reveals several things the production team did not do, and the things they did not do account for much of the negative reception. First, despite the episode being titled TTG VPPG, in a deliberate echo of the Batman v Superman film that had been released earlier that same year, the Teen Titans and the Powerpuff Girls do not actually fight each other. There is no superhero battle in the episode that the title suggests. There is a series of arguments about which team is the better superhero team, and then both teams agree to work together against Mojo Jojo. The promised conflict, the thing the title sold, does not happen. Second, the episode is structurally a Teen Titans Go episode, not a Powerpuff Girls episode. Animation style, the Teen Titans Go. Visual style, the Teen Titans Go. Pacing, and the Teen Titans Go humor. The Powerpuff Girls visit the Teen Titans Go world rather than the other way around. The Powerpuff Girls behave more like their original 1998 versions than like their 2016 reboot versions, which fans of the 2016 reboot noted with frustration and fans of the 1998 original noted as confusingly inconsistent. The casting of Tara Strong, the original voice of Bubbles from the 1998 series, and the current voice of Raven on Teen Titans Go, as Bubbles in this episode, made the situation stranger. If you were a fan of the original 1998 Powerpuff Girls, the absence of Tara Strong from the 2016 reboot was one of the changes you had likely complained about. Tara Strong had been replaced as the voice of Bubbles in the 2016 reboot. The reboot used a different actress. For the crossover episode, Tara Strong returned to voice Bubbles in a single episode that was In Form, a Teen Titans Go episode, on a show she was already on in a role she had not been allowed to keep on the actual Powerpuff Girls reboot. The casting fixed a fan complaint that the Powerpuff Girls 2016 had created. It did so on a Teen Titans Go show that the Powerpuff Girls 2016 had made a wrong choice. This was not lost on anyone watching. Third, and most consequentially for the episode's reception, the Powerpuff Girls in the episode are portrayed as competent, and the Teen Titans are portrayed as immature. The narrator's closing line, that the day was saved no thanks to the Teen Titans, is the explicit statement of the episode's framing. The Teen Titans were the problem. The Powerpuff Girls were the solution. The Teen Titans Go production team had written an episode in which their own protagonists were the villains of the story by implication. This was consistent with the show's general posture of having the Titans be selfish, lazy, and incompetent. It was less consistent with what audiences expected from a crossover episode promoted as a major event. Viewers tuning in, expecting to see two superhero teams team up and behave heroically, were instead shown a story in which one team was a credit to its franchise, and the other team, the team the show is named after, was an active hindrance. The reception data tracks the unease. The episode currently holds a rating of 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb, which is at the lower end of the show's third season ratings. The user reviews that produce that rating are remarkably consistent in their concerns. They note that the episode title promised a fight that did not happen. They note that the Powerpuff Girls characters in the episode did not act like the 2016 reboot versions, but did not act like the 1998 original versions either, leaving them in an unclear middle. They note that the Teen Titans were unflatteringly portrayed. They note most often that the episode was a crossover between two shows that the reviewers actively disliked, and that combining the two shows did not produce a result that was better than either one alone. The phrase that appears repeatedly in the negative reviews is some variant of, why couldn't they just bring the old shows back? The implication of that phrase is the same implication that had followed Let's Get Serious 16 months earlier. The crossover was being used to extend the reach of two reboots that the audience had not asked for, in a way that asked the audience to engage with the reboots rather than with the originals the audience actually wanted. The audience felt this was the wrong direction. If you tuned in expecting a celebration of either franchise, you got instead an episode that quietly indicted your preference for both. What TTG VPPG demonstrated about the Teen Titans Go crossover strategy was that the pattern from Let's Get Serious was not specific to one canceled show. The pattern would apply to any cross-property collaboration the show attempted. If the property being crossed over with was itself in a difficult relationship with its fans, the crossover would inherit that difficult relationship and amplify it. The Powerpuff Girls 2016 was already in a difficult relationship with its fans. Bringing it into Teen Titans Go, a show that was also in a difficult relationship with a portion of its fans, produced an episode that combined two pre-existing frustrations into a single broadcast. The math did not work in the show's favor. If you went into the episode already frustrated with one of the two shows involved, you came out of the episode more frustrated, not less. The frustrations stacked rather than canceling out. There is a piece of context about the Powerpuff Girls 2016 that is worth pausing on, because it sheds light on what Cartoon Network was attempting with this crossover at the broader level. The Powerpuff Girls 2016 had launched to disappointing ratings and worse critical reception. By the time TTG VPPG aired on June 30th, 2016, the network was already aware that the reboot was not landing. The crossover with Teen Titans Go, the network's highest-rated original animated series, was in part an attempt to use the larger show to lift the smaller show. The episode aired on Cartoon Network in a prominent primetime slot and was promoted heavily across the network's other programming. Hero Complex, a Los Angeles Times entertainment site, ran an exclusive first look at the episode in the lead up to its broadcast. The framing of the publicity was that the crossover was a major event, comparable in scale to the live-action superhero crossovers of 2016 like Batman v Superman and Captain America Civil War. The actual episode did not meet the framing. The promotional weight of the launch made the disappointment with the episode more visible than it would otherwise have been. A small failure that was quietly broadcast would have produced a small backlash. A failure that the network had loudly promoted as a major event produced a backlash size to match the promotion. The Teen Titans Go production team did not make a similar attempt to crossover with the Powerpuff Girls 2016 again. The crossover was a single episode. The Powerpuff Girls 2016 ran for 2 seasons and concluded in 2019, having never recovered from its initial reception. The crossover with Teen Titans Go did not save it. It is unclear whether the crossover hurt it further, although several of the negative reviews of the crossover specifically credit the crossover with making them even less likely to watch the Powerpuff Girls 2016 again. The Teen Titans Go production team had attempted to extend their own brand by attaching it to a struggling sister property on the same network. The struggling sister property remains struggling. The Teen Titans Go production team would not attempt another network-spanning crossover for over a year. When they did, the property involved would not be another struggling reboot. It would be a song. There is one production detail about TTG VPPG that became more visible in retrospect after later crossover episodes had aired and a longer pattern was discernible. The episode's writer, Emily Brundage, was a single episode contributor to Teen Titans Go, who had previously created the animated web series Pubertina for the Shut Up, Cartoon's YouTube channel, and would later direct Harvey Girls Forever on Netflix. Brundig was not a regular staff writer on the Teen Titans Go production team. The decision to bring in an outside writer for the show's first major crossover episode is, in retrospect, an unusual choice. The episodes written by the show's regular staff during the same broadcast window were structurally similar to the episodes that came before and after them in the season rotation. The crossover episode being handed to an outside writer suggests, although it does not prove, that the production team treated the crossover as a project that required a different kind of writing skill than their standard episodes. The result, Brundage produced, the script that the regular production team then directed and animated, was structurally a Teen Titans Go episode, but with crossover beats added. The script was effective at delivering what the production team appears to have asked for. The script was less effective at delivering what either of the two fan bases involved appears to have wanted. The legacy of TTG VPPG within the Powerpuff Girls fan community is unusual. The episode is one of a small number of moments in which the 2016 reboot is generally considered to have produced anything positive, primarily because the Bubbles voice in the crossover is the original Tara Strong performance rather than the reboot's replacement. Some Powerpuff Girls fans now retroactively consider Bubbles' appearance in the crossover to be more canonical to the character than her appearances in the actual 2016 reboot, on the grounds that the crossover used the original voice. This is an unusual situation in animation continuity. The official airing show is the one that fans treat as off-model, while the crossover guest appearance on a different show is the one that fans treat as on-model. The Powerpuff Girls 2016 was, in the end, sufficiently disliked by its own audience that even a Teen Titans Go crossover episode containing the characters could be received as a partial corrective to the actual show. This is the strangest legacy any of the 10 crossovers covered here has had. It is also, on its own terms, a marker of how poorly received the Powerpuff Girls 2016 reboot was, that a single voice casting decision in a different show's crossover episode could be read as the corrective the franchise had needed. The fourth of the 10 happened across 4 days in August 2017, from Tuesday the 1st to Friday the 4th, and it was the most ambitious crossover Teen Titans Go ever attempted with non-fictional musicians. The episode, or rather the 4-part special, had the longest title in the show's history at 71 letters. The title was The Day the Night Stopped Beginning to Shine and Became Dark Even Though It Was the Day. Most guides and promotional materials referred to it simply as the Night Begins to Shine special. It was the 27th through 30th episodes of the 4th season and the 184th through 187th episodes of the series overall. 4 episodes that together formed a 44-minute narrative aired across 4 consecutive evenings. The premise of the special was a crossover with real musical artists. 3 of them. Fall Out Boy, CeeLo Green, and Puffy Amiyumi were all featured as themselves, performing covers of a song called The Night Begins to Shine. If you had been watching Teen Titans Go since 2015, you had a relationship with this song. The Night Begins to Shine was, at this point, the most beloved song in the show's catalog. It had originated as a throwaway joke in a Season 2 episode called Slumber Party that aired on March 18th, 2015. In that episode, Cyborg played the song from a cassette tape before going to bed. The song was an original composition created for the show by a band called BER. The band's name stood for Brian, Eddie, and Ronnie, the 3 members. The song was synth-heavy, mid-tempo, and structured like a 1980s power ballad. It was performed sincerely by the band, not as a parody, and the show treated Cyborg's love of it as a recurring character beat across the seasons that followed. By the time The Night Begins to Shine special aired in August 2017, the song had become, within the show, a kind of in-universe pop standard. There had been a full episode in Season 3 called 40%, 40%, 20%. That was entirely about the song. The song had developed an unusual life outside the show, with fans posting cover versions online, fan-made music videos, and discussions of what the song actually meant. The Night Begins to Shine special took this existing affection for the song and built a 4-part narrative around it. The plot involved Cyborg being transported into an alternate reality where the song was a source of magical power, with an evil dragon attempting to steal the song's power for himself. The Titans had to recruit musical allies to help defeat the dragon. The musical allies they recruited were the actual real-world musicians who had recorded covers of The Night Begins to Shine for the special. Fall Out Boy appeared as themselves in animated form. CeeLo Green appeared as himself in animated form. Puffy Amiyumi, the Japanese pop duo that had been the subject of the early 2000s Cartoon Network animated series Hi Hi Puffy Amiyumi, also appeared as themselves. All 3 acts contributed cover versions of the song to the special. The official soundtrack album, Teen Titans Go! Songs from The Night Begins to Shine special was released on July 28, 2017, through Water Tower Music 3 days before the special premiered. The commercial outcomes were unusual. The original version of The Night Begins to Shine by BER charted on the Billboard Rock charts for the week of August 26, 2017, peaking at number 23. The song peaked at number 66 on the iTunes overall music charts and at number 1 on the iTunes rock music charts. A song that had originated as a one-off joke on a children's animated comedy had, 4 years later, become a charting single performed by a real band. The special itself drew strong ratings. If you watched the 4-night broadcast in August of 2017, you got something the show had not offered before. The reviews, for once, were not uniformly negative. The IMDb rating for the 4th chapter of the special, the climactic episode, currently sits at 8.4 out of 10, which is one of the highest ratings any Teen Titans Go episode has received. Reviewers noted the cinematic quality of the animation, the sincere treatment of the song, the absence of the show's usual juvenile humor, and the genuine emotional weight of the climax. The Night Begins to Shine special was, by the metrics of audience response, a success. The reason this success belongs on the list of crossover disasters is what happened next. In 2021, Cartoon Network announced that they were developing a spin-off series based on the alternate reality introduced in The Night Begins to Shine special. The spin-off was to be titled Teen Titans Go! The Night Begins to Shine, and it was to be a standalone series with its own animation style, its own narrative arc, and its own format. The announcement was made publicly with promotional materials and was treated as a confirmed forthcoming project. As of the time this video is being made, no production updates have been released about the spin-off in years. No premiere date was ever set, no animation tests were ever shown publicly. The series, as far as anyone outside Cartoon Network can determine, has been quietly canceled or indefinitely shelved, without any official statement acknowledging this. The audience that responded warmly to The Night Begins to Shine special and was excited about the spin-off has been left waiting for a series that does not appear to be coming. A 5-part sequel to the original special aired in July 2020, marketed as The Night Begins to Shine 2. The sequel ran across 5 episodes of Season 6 and continued the story of the alternate reality, with new BER, compositions, and new musical guests. The sequel was less commercially successful than the original. It did not produce a charting single. The reviews were more mixed. The plan for the spin-off series appears to have been built around the second special and the audience appetite it was supposed to confirm. When the second special performed less strongly than the first, the appetite that the spin-off depended on was reduced. The spin-off, while never officially canceled, never moved forward either. The Night Begins to Shine Special. The original 4-part one from August 2017 currently exists as a beloved moment in the show's history that the production team attempted to extend in 2 different directions and was unable to extend in either. The other thing worth noting about The Night Begins to Shine Special is what it represented about the Teen Titans Go production team's understanding of their own show. The special worked because it was sincere. It did not parody the song. It did not undermine the song. It treated the song as something worth taking seriously and built a narrative around the song that respected the song's emotional register. The Teen Titans in the special behave like protagonists in an action narrative rather than like the comic foils they normally are. The animation style for the alternate reality sequences was elevated above the show's standard Flash animation, drawing on anime cyberpunk influences. The production team was capable of making sincere, cinematic, emotionally weighted animation. They had demonstrated this capacity on a 4-part special about a song they had originally written as a joke. The question that this raised, and that the audience response to the special raised even more sharply, was why this capacity was reserved for special events, rather than being deployed more broadly across the series. The answer, presumably, was that the show's brand identity was built on the comedy, and the show could not deviate from that brand without losing its audience for non-special episodes. If you wanted the show to be sincere, you got the special. If you wanted the show to be sincere, every week you did not get that. The Night Begins to Shine special was permitted to be sincere because it was an event. The rest of the show was by design the opposite. The BER band itself, the 3 musicians who had written and originally performed The Night Begins to Shine, had not anticipated the song's afterlife when they composed it. The song had been written, according to interviews with the band, as a one-off commission with no expectation of recurring use. The licensing arrangement that allowed the song to appear in the original Slumber Party episode had been a standard background music deal. The eventual repeated use of the song across multiple episodes, the elevation of the song into a multi-part special, the commissioning of cover versions by major recording artists, and the Billboard chart entry that followed were all developments that exceeded what either the band or the production team had originally planned. The song's success was, in this respect, organic. It emerged from audience attachment to the original throwaway moment, and was extended by the production team in response to that attachment. The model worked once. The attempt to repeat the model with The Night Begins to Shine 2 in 2020 was an attempt to engineer the same organic success on a planned basis. Engineered repetitions of organic successes in animation as in other fields do not always reproduce the original results. There is one further detail about the special that is worth noting because it casts a strange light on the spin-off that was eventually announced and apparently abandoned. The original Night Begins to Shine special introduces an alternate reality, sometimes called Rad World by the show, which is depicted as having its own internal mythology, its own characters, its own visual style, and its own narrative possibilities. The spin-off that Cartoon Network announced in 2021 was supposed to develop Rad World into a sustained series. The framework was already there. The visual style was already established. The musical identity was already coherent. The spin-off, if produced, would have had a foundation that most new animated series do not have. The fact that the spin-off was announced and then apparently allowed to wither without any official statement suggests that the conditions for producing it were in the end unfavorable for reasons that have not been publicly explained. The Cartoon Network of 2021 was not the same Cartoon Network of 2017 in terms of its programming budget, its leadership, or its corporate parents' strategic priorities. The window during which the spin-off might have been produced appears to have closed. The next crossover the Teen Titans Go production team attempted, less than a year later, would be the largest crossover the show had ever attempted. It would also be the most expensive, the most heavily promoted, and the most commercially consequential. It would not be a television episode, it would be a feature film, and the consequences of how it performed at the box office would shape every crossover the show attempted for the next 3 years. The 5th of the 10 happened on July 27, 2018, and it was the first time the Teen Titans Go production team had attempted a crossover that required a theatrical release to recoup its budget. The film was called Teen Titans Go to the Movies, an animated musical action comedy directed by Aaron Horvath and Peter Ryder McHale, and written by Aaron Horvath and Michael Jelinek. It premiered at the TCL Chinese Theater in Los Angeles on July 22nd, and opened wide in the United States 5 days later. The premise of the film was, structurally, the largest crossover the Teen Titans Go show had ever attempted. The Teen Titans were going to share the screen in their feature film debut with the entire DC Comics film universe. The voice cast assembled for the film was striking. The 5 original Teen Titans Go voice actors all returned. Greg Cipes as Beast Boy, Scott Menville as Robin, Kari Payton as Cyborg, Tara Strong as Raven, and Hynden Walsh as Starfire. The crossover roles, the roles that brought the broader DC universe into the film, were cast with major celebrities. Will Arnett, who also produced the film, voiced Slade. Kristen Bell voiced the in-universe Hollywood director Jade Wilson. Nicolas Cage voiced Superman. Halsey voiced Wonder Woman. Jimmy Kimmel voiced Batman. Lil Yachty voiced Green Lantern. There were additional cameos, including Michael Bolton, John DiMaggio, and Tom Kenny. The Nicolas Cage casting was particularly significant within DC fan culture, because Nicolas Cage had famously been cast to play Superman in a Tim Burton-directed Superman film that had collapsed in pre-production in 1998 and never been made. Cage voicing Superman in an animated film, decades after the live-action role he had never gotten to play, was the kind of casting choice that DC fans had been speculating about for a long time. Teen Titans Go! To the movies delivered it, 20 years after the original collapse, in animation, with Nicolas Cage's son Kal-El Cage also voicing a young Bruce Wayne in the same film. The film's premise was self-referential in the way Teen Titans Go! Episodes tended to be self-referential. The Teen Titans, feeling left out of the superhero movie craze that has produced standalone films for every major DC character, including Alfred the Butler and Batman's utility belt, attempt to manufacture an arch-nemesis for themselves, so they can qualify for their own movie. They settle on Slade. Slade, voiced by Will Arnett, is presented in a manner that visually and tonally echoes Deadpool, the Marvel character whose 2 films, released in 2016 and 2018, had recently revolutionized superhero comedy. The film's plot involves Slade manipulating the Teen Titans into trying to undo the existence of every other superhero, so that the Teen Titans will be the only superheroes left, and Slade will be free to enact his world conquest. The plot is, in its broad outlines, a comedy version of the basic structure of a Marvel Cinematic Universe villain plot. The film is, throughout, aware of this. It comments on its own structure. It comments on the superhero movie genre. It comments on the audience's awareness of the superhero movie genre. It is, in the parlance of contemporary criticism, a meta-superhero film. The reviews were strong. The film's Rotten Tomatoes critic score was high. Reviewers praised the wit, the music, the voice casting, and the willingness to satirize the superhero film genre while still functioning as a superhero film. The film was nominated for several awards. The reception from the original Teen Titans 2003 fanbase, however, was more divided. The fundamental complaint from that fanbase was the same complaint that had attached to every Teen Titans Go. Crossover so far, the Teen Titans Go version of the characters was getting a feature film. The original 2003 Teen Titans, the version of the characters that the older fanbase actually wanted, had never gotten a proper conclusion to its 5th season, which had ended in 2006 with a cliffhanger involving a hint that the character Beast Boy might have spotted his former teammate and love interest, Tara, living an ordinary human life in Jump City. That cliffhanger had never been resolved. The 2003 series had not been renewed for a 6th season. The Teen Titans Go version, which a portion of the older fan base viewed as a fundamental insult to the original characters, was the version that was getting the feature film. The injury was the same one that had been compounding since Let's Get Serious in February 2015. The Teen Titans Go production team was getting the resources, the promotion, and the theatrical release that the original fanbase had been waiting on for over a decade. The film's mid-credits scene made the injury sharper. The mid-credits scene depicted Robin from the 2003 Teen Titans appearing on screen, alongside other members of the original 2003 cast, suggesting that they were arriving to do something. The scene was framed as a tease. It was framed as a hint that the original Teen Titans might be returning. The original 2003 voice cast, which was the same 5 actors who had voiced the Teen Titans Go characters, had recorded new lines for the mid-credits scene specifically. The implication was clear. The original Teen Titans were coming back. The 2003 series was returning. The fans who had waited 12 years for resolution of the Tara cliffhanger and the broader continuation of the original show were finally going to get what they had been asking for. If you sat through the credits, you saw it. The mid-credits scene generated immediate online discussion. Fan forums, comment sections, and social media posts in the weeks following the film's release were full of speculation about what form the return of the original Teen Titans would take. Would it be a streaming series? Would it be a feature film of its own? Would it be a continuation of the original series, picking up where the 2006 cliffhanger had left off? The speculation lasted for months. The commercial performance of the film, however, was a constraint that would determine what actually happened next. Teen Titans Go! To the movies had a production budget of $10 million. It opened in 5th place at the United States box office with a domestic opening weekend of $10,400,000. That was below the industry estimates of mid-teen millions and well below what would have justified a sequel of the same scale. The film's total worldwide gross was approximately $52 million, which on a $10 million budget represented a profit, but not a profit large enough to support the kind of theatrical follow-up Cartoon Network had hoped for. The mid-credits scene, the one that had teased the return of the original Teen Titans, had been designed to be the setup for a sequel that the box office numbers were not large enough to justify. If you had been hoping the mid-credits scene was a promise of a proper theatrical sequel involving the original Teen Titans, you would have to wait. The setup remained on the table. The sequel that the mid-credits scene had implied did not happen in the form the mid-credits scene had implied it would. What happened instead was the 6th of the 10, which is its own entry on this list. The 6th was an attempt to deliver on the mid-credits scene tease in a different format, one that did not require theatrical performance, one that could be produced at a lower budget, one that allowed Warner Bros. To honor the implied promise of the mid-credits scene without committing the resources a theatrical sequel would have required. That 6th crossover would happen the following year, in 2019, and the reception to it would reveal how the broader Teen Titans fan base felt about the way the promise of the mid-credits scene had been honored. The reception was not warm. There is a useful piece of context that frames how Teen Titans Go! To the movies sits on the list of crossover events. The film was, by most reasonable measures, the most successful crossover Teen Titans Go! Ever attempted. The reviews were positive, the casting was praised, the box office produced a profit. The film holds up on its own terms as a competent and frequently funny animated superhero comedy. The reason it appears on this list anyway is that the success of the film, combined with the limits of that success, created a structural constraint that shaped every Teen Titans Go! Crossover that followed. The film made enough money to demonstrate that there was demand for crossover content involving the Teen Titans Go! Characters. The film did not make enough money to justify producing that crossover content at theatrical budgets. The Teen Titans Go! Production team was therefore committed, going forward, to producing crossover content at television or direct-to-video budgets, while still attempting to meet audience expectations that had been set by the theatrical film. The gap between expectation and budget would shape and arguably warp every subsequent crossover the show attempted. The original Teen Titans fanbase, the one that had spent the year between the film's release in July 2018 and the next crossover announcement in early 2019, speculating about what form the original Teen Titans return would take, would find out when the next crossover was finally announced that the form was not the form they had been waiting for. The form they had been waiting for had been priced out by the box office of the film that had implied it was coming. There is one further detail about Teen Titans Go! To the movies that is worth noting because it complicates the simple reading of the film as a divisive crossover. The film includes, in its midsection, a sequence in which the Teen Titans travel back in time and prevent every other superhero from having their origin story. The sequence shows alternate versions of Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and other DC characters losing the formative trauma that made them into heroes. The sequence is, in animation industry terms, an unusually risky comedy beat for a children's film. The film treats the concept of superhero origin stories with a level of ironic distance that is, if anything, more cutting than the standard Teen Titans Go! Mockery of the broader genre. The audience reception of this sequence was, predictably, divided. The portion of the audience that wanted Teen Titans Go! To be willing to engage seriously with the DC universe found the sequence frustrating. The portion of the audience that wanted Teen Titans Go! To engage with the DC universe as comedy material found the sequence sharply effective. The split followed the same demographic split that all of the show's crossover reception had followed since 2015. The film, in this respect, was Teen Titans Go!'s most polished and most expensive expression of the show's consistent posture toward the broader superhero genre. The film was successful with the audience that had always been the show's audience. The film was, predictably, less successful with the audience that had always been the show's critics. The behind-the-scenes story of the film, as it has emerged in interviews with the production team in the years since, also complicates the simple reading. Will Arnett, who voiced Slade and produced the film, had been involved in Warner Brothers' animation projects for years and had pushed for the Teen Titans Go! Film to have the kind of celebrity voice casting it ended up having. The decision to cast Nicolas Cage as Superman was, according to interviews, a personal decision by the production team that originated as a kind of inside joke about the never-made 1990 Superman project and developed into a serious casting offer that Nicolas Cage accepted. The casting was, in this respect, a piece of fan service for a particular kind of DC fan. The film contains several other casting choices that operate as fan service for particular kinds of DC fans. The film therefore does substantial work to acknowledge and reward the DC fanbase that the show's regular series had been frustrating for years. The work was not enough to fully compensate for the cumulative frustration the show had built up, but the work was real, and the film's positive reception from many DC fans is the trace of the work having reached at least a portion of the audience it was aimed at. The 6th of the 10 happened on October 8th, 2018, less than 3 months after Teen Titans Go to the movies. And the surprising thing about it was that it was not technically a Teen Titans Go episode at all. The episode was called Crossover Nexus. It aired as the second to last episode of the second season of OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, another Cartoon Network animated series that had launched the previous year. Crossover Nexus was structurally a tribute to Cartoon Network's history, with cameos from characters across decades of the network's programming. The 4 characters who actually drove the plot, the 4 protagonists who got speaking parts and active roles, came from 4 different currently airing Cartoon Network properties. KO. From OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, Garnet from Steven Universe, Ben Tennyson from the 2017 Ben 10 reboot, and Raven from Teen Titans Go. The 4 heroes had to team up to defeat a villain named Strike, who was turning Cartoon Network heroes into stone. The episode was, by the standards of Cartoon Network crossover events, a major achievement. It was the first time the network had attempted to bring 4 currently airing properties into a single coordinated episode. The cameos were extensive. The episode's wikis document dozens of background characters from across the network's history, many of whom had not appeared in official Cartoon Network media in years or even decades. Mojo, the show's lead character from the early 1990s, was included. I Am Weasel and Major Dr. Ghastly from late 1990s cartoons were included as stone statues. Rodney J. Squirrel from Squirrel Boy was included. The episode functioned, for fans of Cartoon Network, as a kind of love letter to the network's history. It was also for fans of Teen Titans Go, specifically the way the production team chose to honor the implied promise of the mid-credits scene in Teen Titans Go to the movies after the box office of that film had made a theatrical sequel impossible. The reception to Crossover Nexus was unusual, and the unevenness of that reception is the reason the episode belongs on a list of Teen Titans Go crossover disasters. On the level of execution, the episode was widely praised. Its IMDb rating sits at 8.5 out of 10. The user reviews call it one of the most ambitious crossovers in Cartoon Network's history. Reviewers praised the animation, the writing, the willingness to acknowledge the network's deep history, and the way the 4 lead characters were given roughly equal screen time. On the level of audience expectation, however, the episode was a source of significant frustration. The frustration came from 2 directions. The first was about runtime. The episode was 11 minutes long, the standard length for a single episode of OKKO, Let's Be Heroes. Fans who had been hoping for a major Cartoon Network crossover event had expected something closer to the 22-minute special format that the network had used for other major crossovers. 11 minutes for a 4-way crossover that included Steven Universe, Ben 10, and Teen Titans Go was, for many viewers, structurally insufficient. The episode had to introduce 4 protagonists, establish the threat, give each protagonist something to do, and resolve the threat, all within 11 minutes. If you were a fan of any one of the 4 shows involved, you got about 2 minutes of your character before the episode had to move on. If you tuned in expecting a major event, the 11-minute runtime was the first thing you noticed. The pacing was by necessity rushed. The character interactions that the audience had been anticipating, the conversations between Garnet and Raven, between KO and Ben Tennyson, between Raven and Ben Tennyson, were truncated or cut. The 11-minute format did not allow them to breathe. The second source of frustration was about the absence of Teen Titans Go itself from the production credits. Crossover Nexus was formally an OKKO, Let's Be Heroes episode. It was produced by the OKKO team and supervised by the OKKO team. The Teen Titans Go team had no production involvement. Raven, voiced by Tara Strong, appeared as a guest. The Teen Titans Go production team did not contribute to the storyline, the writing, or the framing. This meant that Teen Titans Go fans who had been hoping for the show's promised follow-up to its theatrical film were getting, instead, a brief appearance of one Teen Titans Go character in someone else's show. The format was not the format that the mid-credit scene of Teen Titans Go to the movies had implied. It was something significantly smaller, structurally lighter, and meaningfully outside the Teen Titans Go production team's control. There is one production detail about Crossover Nexus that became publicly known after the episode aired, and that shapes how the episode is now remembered. The original draft of the episode had included a fifth protagonist, a character named 1-1 from Infinity Train, a forthcoming Cartoon Network series that had not yet launched at the time Crossover Nexus aired. 1-1 was to have been one of the heroes alongside KO, Garnet, Ben, and Raven. Late in production, the 1-1 character was cut from the active group and replaced with a Stone cameo, where the character appears briefly in statue form but does not speak or act. The reason given, after the fact, was that the OKKO production team had felt the inclusion of 1-1 was beginning to function as a promotional vehicle for the forthcoming Infinity Train, rather than as a meaningful contribution to the crossover narrative. They preferred to keep the focus on the 4 characters who already had their own active series. The decision was, on its own terms, a reasonable creative judgment. It also reinforced the impression that Crossover Nexus had been produced in a constrained format, with material being cut for time and focus, rather than as the expansive multi-show event that the audience had wanted. The broader pattern that Crossover Nexus contributed to was the pattern of expectation management around Cartoon Network crossover events. The network had, across the preceding 3 years, repeatedly promoted crossover episodes as major events, while delivering episodes that operated within standard television budgets and formats. The promotional framing implied scale. The actual episodes operated at the scale that the network was willing to pay for. The gap between the two was the source of the frustration that attached to almost every crossover the network attempted during this period. Crossover Nexus, despite being a creative success on its own terms, contributed to the gap. The episode was promoted as a multi-show event. The episode was structurally an 11-minute single-show episode with guest cameos. The two framings did not match. The audience that had been promised the larger version reacted to the smaller version with a disappointment that always attaches when expectations and delivery diverge. What Crossover Nexus revealed about the broader Teen Titans Go crossover strategy was a structural shift that had occurred after the theatrical film. The pre-film crossovers had been launched and managed by the Teen Titans Go production team. They had been the team's projects. The post-film crossovers, beginning with Crossover Nexus, would increasingly be projects in which the Teen Titans Go team was a contributor rather than a driver. The Teen Titans Go brand would be deployed by Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers wherever the brand could be useful, regardless of whether the Teen Titans Go production team had originated the project. The team's relationship to its own crossovers became less authorial and more administrative. They would still write the crossovers when they were the primary production. They would also lend their characters and their voice actors to crossovers that other production teams were running. The crossovers stopped being entirely theirs. They became part of a larger Cartoon Network and Warner Bros. Brand strategy, which they were one input into rather than the controlling voice of. There is one further detail about Crossover Nexus that is worth noting because it shaped the legacy of the episode in the years that followed. Okay, KO, Let's Be Heroes, the show that hosted the crossover, was itself canceled at the end of its 3rd season in September 2019, less than a year after Crossover Nexus had aired. The cancellation was a function of multiple factors that had nothing specifically to do with the crossover. But the crossover became, in retrospect, one of the high water marks of a series that did not get to continue. Crossover Nexus is now remembered by fans of OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, as part of the final stretch of the show's run. The Raven cameo, the Garnet cameo, all of which had been somewhat overshadowed at the time of broadcast by audience disappointment about the format, have aged into a different kind of importance now that the host show is no longer in production. The episode has become a kind of monument to a Cartoon Network era that had a particular set of currently airing properties and a particular willingness to attempt collaboration between them. That era, by the time the episode aired, was already beginning to end. The Teen Titans Go show itself was, at the time Crossover Nexus aired, in the middle of its 5th season. The series would continue producing new episodes at a roughly consistent rate for the next several years. The other shows involved in the crossover have had varied trajectories. OKKO, Let's Be Heroes was canceled. Steven Universe completed its run in 2019 with the Steven Universe Future Limited series. The 2017 Ben 10 reboot continued for several more seasons before its own conclusion. Of the 4 properties that contributed protagonists to Crossover Nexus, only Teen Titans Go is still actively producing new episodes as of the time this video is being made. The crossover that had brought 4 currently airing Cartoon Network properties together has become, in the years since, a record of a Cartoon Network that had 4 such properties to bring together. The network does not have that many actively airing original animated series at the same scale today. The next crossover the Teen Titans Go production team would attempt would be the one that actually delivered on the mid-credits scene from the theatrical film. It would happen 10 months after Crossover Nexus, in the summer of 2019. It would not be theatrical, it would not be 22 minutes. It would be a 77-minute direct-to-video feature film, and it would attempt to do, on a direct-to-video budget, what the mid-credits scene of a theatrical film had implied a theatrical sequel would do. The result would be the most divisive single project the Teen Titans Go production team ever released. The 7th of the 10 happened in the summer of 2019, and it was the project that the original Teen Titans 2003 fanbase had been waiting 12 years for. Delivered in a form that the original Teen Titans 2003 fanbase had not been waiting for at all. The film was called Teen Titans Go! Versus Teen Titans. It premiered at San Diego Comic-Con on July 21st, 2019, was released digitally on September 24th, and was released on DVD and Blu-ray on October 15th. It eventually aired on Cartoon Network in February 2020. The film was directed by Jeff Mednico and written by Marley Halpern Gracer and Jeremy Adams. The runtime was 77 minutes. The format was direct-to-video. The budget was, as a function of the format, significantly lower than the $10 million budget of Teen Titans Go! To the movies had been the year before. The film was the formal continuation of the mid-credits scene from the theatrical film The Long-Promised Collision between the 2013 Teen Titans Go! Cast and the original 2003 Teen Titans cast that the fanbase had been speculating about for over a year. The voice cast for the film was almost the entire reason the film existed. The original 2003 Teen Titans had been voiced by the same 5 actors who were already voicing the 2013 Teen Titans Go! Characters: Greg Cipis had voiced Beast Boy in both, Scott Menville had voiced Robin in both, Carrie Payton had voiced Cyborg in both, Hynden Walch had voiced Starfire in both. The 5 actors had been performing the dual roles for years, distinguished by tone and voice register rather than by separate casts. For Teen Titans Go! Versus Teen Titans, the 5 actors voiced both sets of characters simultaneously, switching between the more comic Teen Titans Go! Versions and the more serious 2003 versions across the same film. This was the casting promise the film was built around. 5 voice actors playing 10 characters across the same runtime, with the visual designs and tonal registers distinguishing the 2 sets, but the same human voices doing both. Several reviews noted, with genuine admiration, that the actors made the dual performances feel like distinct characters, rather than like one actor doing a 2-version impression. The plot of the film involves the Master of Games, a villain from the original 2003 Teen Titans series, transporting both teams to an arena and forcing them to compete to determine which set of Titans is the superior set. If you went into the film hoping for an actual fight between the 2 teams, you got it briefly. The competition occupies the first act of the film. The 2 teams eventually realize that the Master of Games is being used by a larger threat. The larger threat is 2 versions of Trigon Raven's Demon Father, who are working together to conquer both realities. The 2 teams have to set aside their rivalry and team up to defeat both Trigons. They do this. The film ends with the 2 teams parting on roughly friendly terms, with the 2003 Robin telling the 2013 Robin that he does not particularly want the 2013 Robin to come visit, a beat that the rest of the 2003 team finds disappointing and that produces a small moment of emotional complexity at the end of the film. The 2013 Titans return to their reality. The 2003 Titans return to theirs. The mid-credits scene of the new film, the second mid-credits scene, the Teen Titans Go! Production team had built into a feature film in 2 consecutive years, depicted Darkseid arriving in the 2013 Titans reality, and being met with exhausted indifference by the 2013 Titans, who refuse to engage with him because they are tired of multiversal threats. The critical reception was mixed positive. IGN gave the film an 8 out of 10, CBR praised it. The Teen Titans Go! Wiki documents several other professional reviews in the positive range, with critics noting that the film respected both versions of the characters and gave each team enough screen time to be meaningfully present rather than reducing one team to background. The audience reception, however, was significantly more divided, and the division ran along the same fault line that had defined Teen Titans Go! crossover reception since 2015. If you had been waiting since 2006 for a proper 6th season of the original Teen Titans, what you got was not what you had been waiting for. The portion of the audience that had been hoping for a proper continuation of the 2003 Teen Titans series, the audience that had been waiting since 2006 for resolution of the Terra cliffhanger and the broader continuation of the original show's tone, felt that the film did not give them what they had been waiting for. The 2003 Teen Titans appeared in the film. The 2003 Teen Titans were voiced by the original actors in the film. The 2003 Teen Titans were treated in the film as serious characters rather than as objects of mockery. None of this, however, amounted to the proper 6th season of the original series that the older fanbase had spent 12 years asking for. The film was structurally a Teen Titans Go production team. It used the Teen Titans Go visual style for the framing material. It treated the 2003 Teen Titans as guests in someone else's project, even though the guests were the version of the characters that had been the originals. If you go reading the reviews left by audiences in the months after the film's release, the disappointment is articulated with unusual precision. The phrasing that recurs in the online reception of the film captures the disappointment with precision. Several reviews use the phrase that the film was the original cast being directed by the writing staff of the spin-off, which one user described as a kind of cruel lie. The 2003 actors had returned. The 2003 characters had returned. The 2003 sensibility, the more serious tone, the willingness to handle dramatic plot beats with emotional weight, did not return in any sustained way, because the framework the 2003 characters were operating within was the framework of a Teen Titans Go. Production, the reunion that the audience had been waiting for, had been delivered in a form that subordinated the thing being reunited to the show that had replaced it. The injury, again, was the same injury that had been compounding since Let's Get Serious. The Teen Titans Go version of the franchise was the version with institutional power. The original 2003 version of the franchise was the version that had to fit itself into the institutional power's preferred format. There is one specific complaint about the film that recurred often enough in the audience reception to be worth quoting closely, because it captures something specific about what the original fan base had wanted. The complaint was that the audience had been promised, by the mid-credits scene of Teen Titans Go, to the movies that the original Teen Titans were coming back. They had assumed that coming back meant the proper 6th season, or at minimum, a standalone feature in the original 2003 visual style and tone. What they got was a Teen Titans Go direct-to-video movie in which the original Teen Titans were one of two sets of guests. In a comedy format, the use of the word back in the original mid-credit scene had carried a meaning the audience had supplied themselves. The use of the word back in the actual delivered project meant something significantly more limited than what the audience had assumed. If you brought your own definition of the word back into the theater with you, you left having had your definition revised downward. The mismatch between the assumed and delivered meanings of the word was where the disappointment lived. The film was, on its own terms, well made, the animation was competent, the voice performances were strong, the plot was coherent, the pacing was reasonable. The reviews from critics who were not part of the original Teen Titans fanbase were largely positive. The audience score, however, on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, ran significantly below the critic score. The gap between the two scores is the trace of the original Teen Titans fanbase registering its disappointment with the format. The film exists today as the only point of resolution that fanbase ever received for the 2006 cliffhanger and the drop's continuation. Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans is the only follow-up the original 2003 series ever got. The fact that the only follow-up was a direct-to-video Teen Titans Go comedy crossover rather than the 6th season the original fanbase had been asking for is the situation the original fanbase has been processing since September 2019. The film's two writers, Marley Halpern Grazer and Jeremy Adams, are worth noting because both of them had backgrounds in the kind of animated, direct-to-video DC features that the original Teen Titans fanbase had been hoping the original series might eventually receive. Jeremy Adams had written several previous direct-to-video DC films, including Mortal Kombat Legends and other entries in the DC animated movie universe. Marley Halpern Grazer had worked on DC and Looney Tunes projects across her career. The two writers were, by background, the kind of writers who could have produced a standalone original Teen Titans continuation film if they had been assigned to do so. Instead, they were assigned to write the Teen Titans Go crossover. The choice to deploy these writers on the crossover rather than on a standalone original Teen Titans project is itself a piece of evidence about how Warner Brothers was thinking about the property in 2019. The studio had the writing talent to produce the original series continuation the fanbase wanted. The studio chose to use that talent on the crossover instead. The choice was a business decision. The Teen Titans Go brand was the brand with active commercial momentum. The original Teen Titans brand was, at that point, dormant. The writers got assigned to the brand that was active. The fan base that had been hoping for the dormant brand to be reactivated got, in lieu of reactivation, a crossover that used the dormant brand as guest material in the active brand's continuing story. The other direct-to-video DC animated films that Warner Bros. Was producing in the same window provide useful comparison data. Justice League vs. The Fatal Five had been released in March 2019, 4 months before Teen Titans Go. Versus Teen Titans premiered at Comic-Con. Fatal Five was a standalone continuation of the Bruce Timm era Justice League animated series, featuring the original voice cast in a serious dramatic narrative aimed at the existing fan base of that earlier show. Batman and Harley Quinn had been released in 2017 with a similar premise, serving as a standalone continuation for fans of Batman the Animated Series. These were the films that the original Teen Titans fanbase had hoped the original 2003 series would receive. These films existed. They had been produced. The model for what the fanbase wanted had been demonstrated twice. In the immediately preceding 2 years, the studio chose, for Teen Titans, a different model. The studio chose the crossover. The reasons for the choice have not been publicly explained by Warner Bros. Or by the production teams involved. The most plausible explanation, based on the publicly available information, is that the choice was driven by a combination of factors. The Teen Titans Go brand had commercial momentum, and the original Teen Titans brand did not. The original 5 voice actors were already on payroll for Teen Titans Go, and could perform both versions in a single production. The crossover format allowed Warner Bros. To honor the implied promise of the theatrical film's mid-credits scene without committing to a standalone production budget. The crossover format also allowed the studio to use the original Teen Titans property as a kind of test, with the option to produce a more substantial follow-up if the crossover performed strongly. The crossover did not perform strongly enough to produce a follow-up. The original Teen Titans property remains 6 years later, dormant. No additional film, no additional series, no additional content of any kind has been produced featuring the original 2003 versions of the characters since Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans. The next crossover the Teen Titans Go production team attempted aired 10 days after the digital release of Teen Titans Go. Versus Teen Titans, it was a return to the standard episode format. It was a return to the standard television budget. It was, structurally, the kind of small, contained crossover that the production team could produce repeatedly without straining their resources. It was, however, also a crossover with another property that the show's writing staff had not been afraid to mock in the past, and the mocking had not stopped just because the new episode was being framed as a celebration. The 8th of the 10 happened on October 4th, 2019, 10 days after the digital release of Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans, and it was a return to the standard half-hour television format that the Teen Titans Go production team had been doing since 2013. The episode was called Cartoon Feud. It was the 47th episode of the 5th season and the 256th episode of the series overall. It was a crossover with the Scooby-Doo franchise, specifically with the Mystery Inc. team. The premise was a parody of the long-running American game show Family Feud, with the Titans and the Scooby-Doo gang competing against each other in a cartoon-themed version of the game. The setup involved Control Freak, a recurring villain who functions in Teen Titans Go, as the meta-narrative antagonist responsible for criticizing the show's existence within the show's own digesis. Control Freak in Cartoon Feud declares that he is tired of the Teen Titans being on the air at the cost of more classic cartoons getting screen time. He takes control of Family Feud and forces the Teen Titans to compete against Mystery Inc., with the losing team to be cancelled permanently. The episode then runs as a parody of a Family Feud broadcast, with Control Freak as the host, the Titans on one side, and the Scooby Gang on the other. The Scooby Gang dominates the first round. The Titans struggle. The episode includes the actual structural beats of a Family Feud game, including the survey questions, the fast money round, and the prize wheel, all reframed for the cartoon-themed parody. The voice cast included Matthew Lillard as Shaggy. Matthew Lillard had been the replacement voice for Shaggy since 2009. After Casey Kasem, who had voiced the character for 40 years, had retired from the role, Lillard had also played Shaggy in the 2 live-action Scooby-Doo films from 2002 and 2004. By the time Cartoon Feud aired in October 2019, Lillard had been the official voice of Shaggy for 10 years, longer than several of the actors who had voiced original animated characters across multi-decade franchises. His casting in Cartoon Feud was the standard casting for a Shaggy appearance and was not controversial. Kate Micucci voiced Velma, having previously voiced the same character in the contemporaneous Scooby-Doo and Guess Who series that was airing on Boomerang at the time. Gray Delisle voiced Daphne. The Scooby-Doo characters in the episode were voiced by the actors who were actively voicing them in their own series at the time. The casting was not the issue. The issue, as it had been with every Teen Titans Go crossover involving another property, was the framing. The episode is structurally about whether the Teen Titans deserve to exist. Control Freak is openly hostile to the Teen Titans throughout the episode. The Scooby-Doo gang is presented as wholesome and beloved. The Titans are presented as obnoxious and loud. The premise of the episode is that one of the two shows should be canceled, and the implication for most of the episode is that the show that should be canceled is Teen Titans Go itself. This is the show's standard posture toward itself, the willingness to acknowledge and parody its own critics from within its own narrative. The posture has become so familiar across the show's run that the audience expects it. The audience also, however, gets less out of it the more often the show deploys it. If you had been watching the show for any meaningful length of time, you had seen Control Freak deliver this exact kind of speech before. By the time of Cartoon Feud in October 2019, the show had used the self-critical villain device dozens of times. The novelty had worn off. The Teen Titans Go production team appears to have been aware of this. They built the device into the episode anyway. The episode resolved, predictably, with the Teen Titans saving Scooby-Doo from being defeated and the two shows being allowed to coexist on the air. The reception was tepid. The episode currently sits at 6.6 out of 10 on IMDb, in the middle of the show's 5th season ratings. Neither acclaimed nor reviled. The user reviews note the Scooby-Doo cameos appreciatively. They note the Family Feud parody competently. They note that the episode did not in any meaningful way advance the show's narrative or develop the characters or do anything that the show had not done before. The episode was, to use a term that recurs frequently in animation criticism of late period long-running shows, a serviceable episode. It existed, it aired, it met the minimum standard of being recognizably a Teen Titans Go episode. It did not exceed that minimum standard. The crossover with Scooby-Doo was the reason the episode existed and was the basis on which it was promoted. But the crossover itself did not produce a meaningful collaboration between the two franchises. It produced an episode of Teen Titans Go in which characters from Scooby-Doo appeared briefly. There is a piece of production context about Cartoon Feud that is worth noting because it adds a layer to how the episode functioned within the broader Teen Titans Go crossover strategy. The episode was written by staff members who had also worked on the 2015 Be Cool Scooby-Doo series. Michael Jelenic, Jeff Mednico, Brady Klosterman, and James Krensky had all worked on Be Cool Scooby-Doo alongside writers Amy Wolfram and Ben Joseph. Be Cool Scooby-Doo had been a Cartoon Network reboot of the Scooby-Doo franchise that had run for 2 seasons from 2015 to 2017 and had received significant backlash from Scooby-Doo fans for its updated animation style and more. Comedy-oriented tone, the same production cluster that had made Be Cool Scooby-Doo was now bringing Scooby-Doo characters into Teen Titans Go. If you were the kind of viewer who tracked the careers of animation writers across multiple shows, you would have recognized the overlap. The two productions shared more than just network affiliation. They shared personnel, sensibilities, and the general approach of making comedy-forward reboots of properties that had previously been more serious. Cartoon Feud was, in this sense, a meeting of two productions that had taken similar approaches to similar source material and had received similar reactions from similar fan bases. The episode acknowledged this only obliquely, with the Family Feud structure functioning as a kind of in-jokey tournament between two versions of the same, broader animation comedy strategy. What Cartoon Feud demonstrated, looking back, is how routine the crossover format had become for the Teen Titans Go production team by late 2019. The crossover had become a tool the team could deploy at will, with the casting of other shows' actors being something they could arrange on the standard production schedule, and the structural premises being things they could write in a few weeks. The crossover was no longer a major event. It was a recurring feature of the show's standard episode rotation. The dozens of crossovers attempted between 2019 and 2021, including with DC Superhero Girls, with the original Thundercats franchise via Thundercats Roar, with Beetlejuice, with Freakazoid, with the eventual Space Jam project, all proceeded from this baseline. The Teen Titans Go production team was by this point in the crossover business. The crossover was by this point an expected element of the show's identity. The Scooby-Doo franchise itself, the property that Cartoon Feud was nominally celebrating, was in an unusual position at the time of the crossover. The original What's New Scooby-Doo era had ended in 2006. The Mystery Inc. era had ended in 2013. The Be Cool Scooby-Doo era, the era that the Cartoon Feud writers had been involved in, had ended in 2017. The Scooby-Doo and Guess Who series, where Kate Micucci was actively voicing Velma, had launched in June 2019 on Boomerang and would run until 2021. The Scooby-Doo franchise was, structurally, in a low-investment maintenance period at Warner Bros. Animation. There were no major Scooby-Doo films in production. There were no major Scooby-Doo events on the calendar. The franchise was being kept ticking through Boomerang and direct-to-video releases, while the studio considered what to do with it next. Cartoon Feud, in this context, functioned as a small additional point of brand activity for Scooby-Doo, during a period when the franchise needed all the brand activity it could get. The crossover served Scooby-Doo as much as it served Teen Titans Go. The Teen Titans Go brand was, in this respect, lending its visibility to a Warner Bros. Franchise that was, at the time, in a maintenance phase. The pattern of using Teen Titans Go as a vehicle to support other Warner Bros. Properties that were in maintenance or transitional phases would become more visible across the next 2 years. The Teen Titans Go production team was, in production terms, reliable. The show produced episodes on schedule, at predictable cost with a known audience. Other Warner Bros. Animation projects, including reboots that were struggling and revivals that were uncertain, did not have the same reliability. Teen Titans Go, as a result, became a kind of utility platform for the broader animation portfolio, capable of producing crossover episodes on short notice that could provide promotional support to whatever other property needed it. Cartoon Feud was an early example of this. The next two crossover episodes, Teen Titans Roar and Teen Titans Go, see Space Jam, would be more direct examples. The trajectory was already in motion when Cartoon Feud aired. Cartoon Feud is best understood, in retrospect, as one of the first episodes that quietly inaugurated the trajectory, rather than as a standalone creative choice in isolation. The next crossover the show would attempt was the one that produced the most visibly negative reception of any episode the show had ever aired. The reception was not negative because the production quality was poor. The reception was negative because the episode chose to address its own critics directly, in the form of a crossover. And the audience that was the target of the address responded with the kind of unified hostility that the audience had been building up across years of similar attempts. The episode was the second to last episode the show would air before the production team began their next chapter, and it was, in a real sense, the encapsulation of everything the production team had learned about how to alienate the audience that did not like them. The 9th of the 10 happened on April 4th, 2020. With a soft release on the Cartoon Network website on March 13th of the same year. The episode was called Teen Titans Roar. It was the 52nd episode of the 5th season and the 261st episode of the series overall. It was the season finale of season 5. It was a crossover with Thundercats Roar, a Cartoon Network animated series that had launched in February 2020 as a comedy reboot of the Thundercats franchise. The crossover was written by Michael Jelenic. Michael Jelenic had also developed, alongside Ethan Spalding, the 2011 Thundercats reboot, a more serious anime-inspired adaptation that had been cancelled after one season due to low ratings. Michael Jelenic was therefore in the unusual position of having developed three things relevant to this episode. He had developed Teen Titans Go, the show airing the episode. He had developed the 2011 Thundercats reboot, a previous version of the property being crossed over with, and he had written the episode itself, a crossover between the show he developed and the new Thundercats Roar, which itself was a comedy reboot of the franchise that he had previously rebooted in a more serious direction. The premise of the episode was structurally identical to the premise of Let's Get Serious from 5 years earlier, with the polarity reversed. The Titans become outraged when they learn that their favorite childhood cartoon, the original 1985 Thundercats, has been rebooted as a comedy series. They make a plan to get the new comedy version off the air. They mock the new version. They mock the people who like the new version. They mock the people who hate the new version. They themselves are then mocked in the episode for being the kind of fans who get upset about reboots. The episode is, in the parlance of the show, another hater episode. The targets are the same targets that Let's Get Serious had been about, but the framing is the reverse. In Let's Get Serious, the show had brought in characters from a canceled serious show and used them to mock the show's comedy-focused critics. In Teen Titans Roar, the show brings in characters from a contested new comedy reboot and uses them to mock the people who do not want the contested new comedy reboot to exist. If you had watched Let's Get Serious in 2015, you had already seen this episode. The form is the same, The target is the same demographic. The intent is the same. The execution is just more brittle, because by 2020, the show had been doing this for 5 years, and the audience that was the target of the address had become extremely good at recognizing when it was being targeted. The production process for the episode was atypical. Michael Jelenic, the writer, has described the episode publicly as one of the few he wrote as a single draft. The trailer for Thundercats Roar had released in May 2018. The reaction to the trailer online had been, in Jelenic's words, disproportionate and silly. Jelenic wrote the script for Teen Titans Roar. Immediately upon seeing the reaction to the trailer, he pitched the script to Warner Bros. Animation as a Teen Titans Go crossover episode about Thundercats Roar fan reactions and promised that the episode would be funny. The pitch was approved. The episode was animated using, in large part, footage borrowed from the actual Thundercats Roar series, specifically from the show's intro sequence and from its first episode, called Exodus. The visual elements that established the Thundercats Roar characters in the crossover episode were not newly produced animation. They were reused animation from the actual show. The cost of producing the crossover was therefore meaningfully lower than the cost of producing a standard new episode would have been, because much of the visual labor was already done. The cameos in the episode were specific. Max Mittelman, the voice of Lion-O in Thundercats Roar, reprised the role for the crossover. Larry Kenney, the voice of Lion-O in the original 1985 series, and also a voice actor on Thundercats Roar in the role of Jaga, appeared in the crossover episode as the original 1985 Lion-O. The original Lion-O in the episode's resolution appears in the sky and delivers a line that has become the most quoted line in the episode's reception. The line is that Thundercats Roar is a worthy successor, and that anyone who says otherwise has a poop mouth with poop opinions. This is the show's resolution to the conflict the episode has been depicting. The audience that is upset about the reboot is dismissed by the voice of the original character those audience members are loyal to, as having opinions that are not worth taking seriously. If you were that audience member, you were being told by the actor whose performance you loved that your opinion was not valuable. The reception was the lowest of any episode in the show's history up to that point. The episode's IMDb rating is 4.9 out of 10, which is meaningfully below the show's average across all seasons. The user reviews are unusually direct in articulating their complaint. The complaint is that the episode does not actually engage with the criticism it is depicting. It mocks the kind of fan who criticizes a reboot. It does not address whether the criticism is correct. It treats the act of criticism itself as the problem, rather than treating the criticism as something that might have substance. The reviews frequently note that the writer, Michael Jelenic, had been one of the developers of the 2011 Thundercats reboot, which had been received much more positively by Thundercats fans than the comedy reboot now being defended. Jelenic was therefore, in the eyes of the audience, defending a version of the franchise that he himself had previously declined to make. The reviews ask, with various levels of patience, why he had switched sides on the same property and was now using the different show to mock the audience that had supported the version of the property he had previously been responsible for. There is one specific element of the episode that the reception singled out, and that worth noting on its own, because it captures the tone of the episode more sharply than any single line of dialogue could. The episode includes, near the end, a brief shot of the corpse of Panthro from the original 1985 Thundercats series. Earl Hyman, the original voice actor for Panthro, had died in 2017, 3 years before the episode aired. The corpse of Panthro in the episode functions, depending on interpretation, as either a casual joke about the inevitability of older animated franchises being replaced by newer ones, or as a more pointed gesture at the actual death of a beloved voice actor. If you knew that Earl Hyman had died 3 years before the episode aired, you read the corpse one way. If you did not, you read it another. The audience reception read it predominantly as the latter. The episode was widely criticized for being disrespectful to the original franchise on a level that went beyond mocking the fans, by including a visual gesture at the death of the original cast member. Thundercats Roar itself, the show that Teen Titans Roar was promoting, was cancelled within a year of airing. The show ran for one season of 52 short-form episodes and was not renewed. The audience that the comedy reboot had been intended for did not materialize at the scale Cartoon Network had hoped. The fans of the original Thundercats had not been converted by the crossover or by the show itself. The Teen Titans Roar episode, which had been built around the premise that Thundercats Roar was a worthy successor that anyone reasonable would accept, aired in early April 2020. By early 2021, Thundercats Roar had been quietly removed from active production. The defense of the show that the crossover episode had been built around had not, in the end, been a defense the audience accepted. The broader context for the failure of Thundercats Roar, and for the failure of Teen Titans Roar to rescue it, is worth pausing on because it casts the Teen Titans Go crossover strategy in a particular light. The 2010s had been, across the animation industry, a period of significant experimentation with comedy-forward reboots of historically serious franchises. Teen Titans Go itself was a product of this experimentation. Be Cool Scooby-Doo had been another product. Thundercats Roar was a late entrant. The Powerpuff Girls 2016 reboot belonged to the same broader category. The pattern across all of these projects was consistent. The new comedy version would launch, would draw a portion of the existing fan base, would alienate another portion of the existing fan base, would fail to attract a large enough new audience to compensate, and would either struggle through a short run or, in the case of Teen Titans Go, itself succeed despite the controversy by relying on a young viewership that did not have nostalgic attachment to the original. Thundercats Roar did not have the young viewership it needed. The Teen Titans Roar crossover did not provide it. The crossover strategy, applied to a struggling reboot, could not by itself manufacture the audience that the reboot needed to survive. The Teen Titans Go production team had taken on a task that was beyond what a single crossover episode could deliver. The other thing worth noting about the period in which Teen Titans Roar aired is what was happening at Cartoon Network more broadly. In late 2019 and into 2020, Cartoon Network was transitioning under new corporate leadership at parent company AT&T, which had completed its acquisition of Warner Bros. Parent Time Warner in 2018. The animation division was being reorganized. Several long-running shows were being concluded. Several development pipelines were being narrowed. The era of Cartoon Network original animation that had produced Adventure Time, Steven Universe, Regular Show, The Amazing World of Gumball, and the original Teen Titans Go was ending. The era that would follow, defined by a smaller slate of original series and a greater reliance on license and streaming focused content, was beginning. Teen Titans Roar aired in the transition zone between the two eras. It was, in this sense, a transition document. The show that hosted the crossover was about to enter a different production environment. The network that aired the crossover was about to make different programming choices. The crossover format itself, which had been a major Cartoon Network identity element for several years, would be deployed less often in the years that followed, because the network would have fewer original animated series to cross over with. The next crossover the Teen Titans Go production team would attempt would not be in defense of a struggling reboot on the same network. It would be a tie-in to a theatrical film that had nothing to do with the Teen Titans Go universe in any meaningful way, and it would be the most directly commercial crossover the team would ever produce. The 10th of the 10 happened on June 20th, 2021, and it was the most unusual format the Teen Titans Go production team had ever used for a crossover. The film was called Teen Titans Go: See Space Jam. It was released as a direct-to-video television movie. It had a runtime of 1 hour and 20 minutes. It was directed by Peter Rita, Mikhail, and written by Brady Klosterman. It was, structurally, a crossover with the 1996 theatrical film Space Jam, the live-action and animated hybrid sports comedy starring Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes. The way the crossover worked was unusual. The Teen Titans Go: See Space Jam was not a sequel to Space Jam, was not a remake of Space Jam, and was not a new story involving the Space Jam universe. The Teen Titans Go: See Space Jam was, for most of its runtime, the original 1996 Space Jam film playing in its entirety, with the Teen Titans Go characters watching the film and providing commentary over the top of the original audio. The framing device for this was a watch party. The premise of the film was that the Teen Titans receive a visit from the Nerdlucks, the alien villains from the original Space Jam. The Nerdlucks have come to attack the Teen Titans, but Cyborg recognizes them and explains that they are the villains from his favorite movie. The other Teen Titans, except for Cyborg, have not seen Space Jam. Cyborg arranges a watch party for his teammates so that they can experience the film. The watch party occupies most of the runtime of Teen Titans Go: See Space Jam. If you sat down to watch this film expecting an original story, what you got instead was a viewing of a film you had already seen, with comedic commentary running over the top. The viewer of Teen Titans Go: See Space Jam therefore watches the Teen Titans watch Space Jam, with the Teen Titans providing comedy commentary over the film as it plays. The format is, structurally, a parody of Mystery Science Theater 3000 and the Riff Tracks derivative format, with the Teen Titans replacing the silhouettes of Mike, Joel, and the bots. The reason for this format is the reason this entry exists on a list of crossover disasters. Teen Titans Go: See Space Jam was a tie-in to the forthcoming Space Jam: A New Legacy, the sequel to the original Space Jam that was scheduled for theatrical release on July 16, 2021. Less than a month after Teen Titans Go, see Space Jam. Space Jam: A New Legacy was a major Warner Bros. Theatrical release with substantial marketing investment. The studio needed promotional vehicles to drive awareness of the sequel. The Teen Titans Go production team was available, had a track record of crossover episodes, and could produce a tie-in quickly within their standard television budget. The result was a film that existed primarily to remind audiences that the original Space Jam existed and that a sequel was coming. The film did not have a substantial original narrative. The film did not significantly involve the Looney Tunes. The film did not significantly involve the Teen Titans doing anything that resembled their normal characters doing normal Teen Titans things. The film was a delivery mechanism for the original Space Jam, repackaged with comedy commentary as a lead-in to a theatrical release the audience could go see a month later. If you went into this film expecting a Teen Titans Go film, you did not get one. If you went into it expecting a Space Jam continuation, you did not get one of those either. The reception was the most cynical of any reception any Teen Titans Go crossover have received. The Rotten Tomatoes audience score sits at 52%. The user reviews are unusually specific in their complaint. The complaint is that the film is, by design, a corporate promotion mechanism rather than a piece of creative work. The reviews note that the format precluded the Teen Titans from being meaningfully present as characters because most of the runtime was occupied by the original Space Jam. The reviews note that the commentary itself was thin, with the Teen Titans largely making observations about how the original film looked or about the basketball player career trajectories of the human cast. The reviews note that the watch party format ensured the audience was, for most of the runtime, watching a film they had already seen in 1996, with comedic interruptions that did not add substantively to the experience of watching the original. The phrase that recurs in the negative reviews is that the film was a corporate sellout. The reviewers are aware of the structural function the film was performing within Warner Bros.' broader release calendar. They are aware that the film exists to promote Space Jam: A New Legacy. They are not, on the whole, willing to grant that this is a reasonable purpose for a film. The Teen Titans Go production team's willingness to produce a film whose primary purpose was promotional rather than creative was, for many reviewers, the moment at which the team's broader crossover strategy crossed from divisive into something more cleanly disappointing. The crossovers up to this point had been creative decisions, however unevenly received. This crossover was a commercial decision dressed up in the format of a creative project. If you reviewed this film at the time, you noticed. The reviewers noticed, the reviewers said so. The reviewers said so at length. The commercial outcome was mixed. The film was widely available on home video and streaming. It was watched by a substantial number of viewers, in part because of the promotional support and in part because of brand familiarity with both Teen Titans Go and Space Jam. The film's release did support the launch of Space Jam: A New Legacy in a measurable way. Space Jam: A New Legacy itself, when it was released in July 2021, performed below expectations, received mixed reviews, and is generally not considered a successful continuation of the original. The promotional vehicle had done its job for a sequel that did not, in the end, justify the promotion. Teen Titans Go sees Space Jam exist now in a strange historical position. It is a tie-in to a film that did not become important. It is a watch-along of a film that was already widely available in its original form. It is a crossover between the Teen Titans Go universe and the Space Jam universe that did not produce any lasting connection between the two. It is, on every level, a structurally unnecessary project that was produced for reasons that turned out to be insufficient to justify the production. If you ever watch this film, you will feel the structural unnecessity yourself within about 15 minutes. The Teen Titans Go production team has continued producing the show since June 2021. The show is currently in its 9th season as of March 2025. There have been additional crossovers since Teen Titans Go. See Space Jam, including with DC Superhero Girls, with the Doom Patrol, and with various Warner Bros. Anniversary celebrations. The 10 chosen for this video are the 10 that mattered most in the trajectory the team traveled across the formative 6 years of the show's crossover history. The 11th and 12th and 13th and beyond have continued the patterns the first 10 established, with varying levels of success and almost always with the same structural tension between what crossovers had been built up to mean and what budgets and production realities allowed them to actually be. There is one additional detail about Teen Titans Go, see Space Jam, that is worth noting because it sheds light on the way Warner Bros. Was thinking about its animated brands at the time. The film was released on home video and made available through HBO Max, the Warner Bros. Streaming service that had launched in May 2020. The The film was, in this respect, part of the broader corporate strategy around HBO Max. The streaming service needed family content. Teen Titans Go! See Space Jam was family content. It was also tie-in content that would naturally direct viewers towards Space Jam, a new legacy which would itself be a HBO Max launch in addition to its theatrical release. The film was, structurally, doing multiple corporate jobs simultaneously. It was supporting Space Jam: A New Legacy. It was filling out the family content offering on HBO Max. It was extending the Teen Titans Go! Brand into the home video and streaming spaces. It was generating, presumably, some additional revenue for Warner Brothers. Through home video sales, the film had 4 or 5 different corporate purposes, none of which had to do with telling a particularly meaningful story about Teen Titans Go! Or about Space Jam. The audience that watched the film noticed the absence of meaningful storytelling. The audience reception scored accordingly. The voice cast for the film was the standard Teen Titans Go! Cast, with the addition of John DiMaggio and Fred Tatasciore voicing the various nerdlucks who appear briefly at the start and end of the watch party framing device. Archive footage from the original Space Jam was used throughout for the watch party content, meaning that the original 1996 voice performances of Michael Jordan, Bill Murray, Wayne Knight, and the various NBA players who appeared in the original were reused. Several of the players who appeared in the original Space Jam, including Charles Barkley and Danny Ainge, are credited in Teen Titans Go! See Space Jam for the archive footage. The film therefore has, in its credits, a long list of celebrities whose contribution was that they had appeared in a different film 25 years earlier and had given permission for that footage to be reused. The credit roll at the end of the film, accordingly, is unusual in animation. It lists a mix of voice actors, animators, and archive footage celebrities, with the archive footage section running longer than any animated film would typically have. What Teen Titans Go! See Space Jam represents, looking back at the full list of 10 crossovers, is the endpoint of a trajectory that had been visible since Let's Get Serious in February 2015. The early crossovers had been creative decisions about how to engage with other properties. The middle crossovers had been creative decisions about how to extend the show's brand. The late crossovers had been commercial decisions about how to support other Warner Bros. And Cartoon Network properties through the Teen Titans Go! Brand, the Teen Titans Go! Brand had become, by the time of Space Jam, a kind of utility infielder for the broader Warner Brothers animation strategy, deployable wherever a tie-in or a crossover or a promotional vehicle was needed. The team that had once mocked Young Justice in a confident gesture of newly established institutional power was now, 6 years later, doing watch-along commentary on a 25-year-old film to support a forthcoming theatrical release. The audience would, in a month, decide they had not particularly needed either. The 10 crossovers, taken together, describe an arc that none of the individual episodes describe on their own. The arc moves from creative confidence to commercial obligation, from the show's production team making decisions about how to engage with other properties, to the show's production team being deployed by Warner Brothers, and Cartoon Network to support whatever other property needed support. The early crossovers were assertive. The middle crossovers were ambitious. The late crossovers were defensive, in the sense that they were trying to defend the continued health of brands and properties that were not, on their own, healthy. The Teen Titans Go! Production team did not set out in February 2015 to spend the next 6 years becoming the corporate utility brand of choice for Warner Brothers. Animation. They set out in February 2015 to make a confident statement about their show's place in the broader landscape of superhero animation. The statement landed, the landscape responded. The team that made the statement found themselves, 6 years later, in a position they had not specifically planned for, but that the statement they made had helped create. The pattern is not unique to Teen Titans Go! Animation history is full of long-running series that started as confident creative projects and ended as utility brands. The Simpsons followed roughly this trajectory at Fox. Family Guy did the same. The Looney Tunes themselves have spent decades being deployed across various Warner Brothers corporate purposes that have very little to do with the original short films that made the characters famous. The trajectory is, in this respect, what happens to animation properties that succeed commercially over a long enough period. The properties become assets. The assets get used wherever the parent company decides they should be used. The creative authorship that produced the original property recedes into the background as the property's commercial utility moves into the foreground. Teen Titans Go! Is, in 2025, well advanced into this phase of its existence. If you have watched the show recently, you will have noticed the difference. The current 9th season is being produced with a smaller writing staff, with fewer ambitious crossover events. with more reliance on standard episode formats that do not require significant promotional support. The crossover era, the era this video has been covering, is largely over for the show as an event-driven phenomenon. If you came to this video hoping for more recent examples, you will have noticed that the list above ends in 2021. Crossovers still happen. They are no longer the kinds of events that fan bases organize their viewing around. If you have made it this far through the video, you may have noticed a consistent thread running across all 10 of the crossovers covered. What the audience that disliked Teen Titans Go always wanted from the first complaint about the show in 2013 forward was for the production team to stop making crossovers in the specific way the team made them. The team's specific way involved using crossovers to comment on the production team's relationship to the property being crossed over with, rather than using crossovers to develop a story in which both properties got to be themselves. The early crossovers commented on the Young Justice fanbase, on the Powerpuff Girls fanbase, on the TMNT fanbase. The late crossovers commented on the Thundercats Roar fanbase, and on the audience's relationship to nostalgic properties like Space Jam. The commentary was always the point. The commentary was always the reason the crossovers existed. The fans who wanted crossovers that were not also commentary about how silly the fans of the source material were, did not, across 6 years and 10 crossovers, ever get the crossovers they wanted. The production team's house style precluded those crossovers. The production team's house style was what the production team had built the show around. The two things were inseparable. On February 26, 2015, an animated character from a canceled superhero cartoon walked onto the screen of the show that had taken its place and told the show's protagonists that they were a mockery of everything the world holds sacred about heroes. 6 years later, in June 2021, the show that had hosted that exchange released an 80-minute film that consisted largely of the show's protagonists watching a 25-year-old basketball comedy and making jokes about it for a corporate parent that needed promotional support for a sequel. The distance between those two productions is the distance the show traveled across the period this video has covered. The Aqualad line, when it aired, was a confident assertion of the show's right to exist on its own terms. The Space Jam watch-along, when it aired, was a less confident but more profitable demonstration that the show's right to exist had been monetized to a degree the Aqualad line could not have anticipated. The show was, in both cases, a mockery of everything the world holds sacred about heroes. The difference was that the first time the show acknowledged this, and the second time the show was being paid not to acknowledge it. The mockery had become the business model. If you have enjoyed this long-form sleep essay, subscribe for more Teen Titans deep dives. Thank you for staying, sleep well, and I will see you next time.